Hi, you're listening to Defend Your Time, brought to you by Continue. I'm your host, Chris Taylor. This is the podcast where we help you get stronger security, better value, and fewer headaches out of your Microsoft security investments. This is our first episode back after the new year, so if you're tuning in, Happy New Year. I'm joined today by Dean Ellerby, VP of Community and Product Strategy at RoboPack, a Microsoft MVP and Technical Fellow in Cybersecurity for AlpenShield. Dean, thank you for joining me today.
Good to be here. Thank you.
All right, so today we're going to be talking about OT security, the state of OT security, why it matters to security leaders. So Dean, first, before we dive into this topic, could you just introduce yourself for us?
Yeah, I think you did that pretty well. So VP Community and Product at RoboPack. Really, I'd help RoboPack design their go-to-market from a community perspective for their main product, RoboPack, which is third-party application patching. Obviously, I'm a Microsoft MVP, and really that's mainly because I outwardly communicate my thoughts and strategies and plans and information that I gather about these tools to the community through events that I run and through public speaking and also through my YouTube channel and blogging that I do. I'm quite a outward-facing person when it comes to the technical stuff that I know. And then also technical fellow in cybersecurity at AlpenShield. That really is helping them build their training platform for their customers and also for their managed service customers, because they have a lot of customers who really leverage their cybersecurity platform to secure their devices, and they're focused on Microsoft solutions and Microsoft tools. So it's a really good idea to train them up and make them have the best tools they have and the best use of those tools. And so the training platform, the AlpenShield Academy, gives them the chance to train people right from the ground up, those new hires that they've got looking after those devices, right to the top of their SOC.
Excellent. Thank you. And your reputation precedes you. You're obviously a very prolific person in the community around Microsoft security. So many topics we could go into today. And thank you for being here to talk about OT security specifically. This is a topic that seems to come up fairly regularly. I wanted to ask you if you could help me just define what is OT security. What types of endpoints are we talking about here?
Sure. So OT security, it's not just the OT out of IoT, because IoT is Internet of Things and OT would be of things, which wouldn't make any sense at all. OT security is actually operational technology, and it focuses on protecting the systems and devices that control physical processes in many industries, like manufacturing, obviously, but even energy, transportation, healthcare, anything that has a machine that isn't an actual computer needs to be controlled in some way, because machines typically don't control themselves. They don't autonomously yet autonomously decide what to do next. So we need some way to control those, and that's things like PLCs, programmable logic controllers, which actually tell industrial things or machines what to do, when to turn on, when to switch off, when to pump faster, when to pump slower. All of those controls are operational technology. Conversely, IT secures data, gives the ability to do work that we normally know of in IT environments, is really securing, OT security is really securing the safety and reliability and the availability of those operations that take place.
That's a really helpful explanation. And obviously the acronyms can be a bit confusing sometimes. So you're in front of security teams all the time, security leaders. From your perspective, what is the current state of OT security? What are the big threats? How mature are organizations typically that you see when it comes to managing OT security? Obviously, there's a bit of a difference between being managed by the IT team versus the security team. What are your thoughts there?
It's evolving, I think. It's evolving out of necessity because threats are evolving and becoming more prevalent. But it still massively lags behind IT security in many aspects. For example, OT systems are often targeted by more sophisticated cyber attacks, because in an IT world, a cyber attack could be as simple as a phishing campaign and someone downloads something they shouldn't and then gives their credentials. It's quite hard to do that kind of thing in an OT environment. You really need to be specifically targeting operational technology in order to attack operational technology. So they're more sophisticated cyber attacks, which could include ransomware. Those things still exist in OT, espionage, and also nation-state stuff. We've got many examples of where nation-states, certainly over the past few years, up to a decade really, where that's really had an impact. From a maturity perspective, the problem is that it's mainly legacy systems. Operational technology and machines don't normally have a 2 to 3 year refresh cycle. You don't typically spend $1 million on a machine and then refresh it in a year's time. you typically keep it for as long as you possibly can. And they're designed to last. They're machines. They're meant to last for, if you ask the people who sold it to you, they're meant to last for 30 to 40 years. So you're not going to update that as often as you might update your Dell laptop. And because they were built many years ago, some of these machines, they might not even have the capability to update on a regular basis. Updating them might require taking them offline for a month, which might not be possible in any environment, actually, thinking about it. The other thing is a challenge around integration with IT, because IT security teams are normally the people who are responsible for IT within an environment, within a customer. And we don't normally have an OT security team, because we've got an OT team who are responsible for the technology, but they don't have a security mindset. They have a production mindset. That's what they have to do. That's how they make their money. They are efficient, and they build things and they make things as efficiently as possible. They don't have a security mindset. And the security team from the IT side, they don't have a production mindset normally. So it can be quite difficult to integrate those, and also integrating the actual software that looks for vulnerabilities on OT devices. For many years, that was very specialist. We've seen it become more prevalent and more available, with Microsoft releasing a big push on a Defender for IoT, which also includes an OT component, but it's still evolving. And I think finally, just awareness. So it's common for IT people to really understand the IT security aspect. If their Windows machine needs patching, you understand that it's out of date and there must be a vulnerability that is being patched by that security update. That's not as obvious when it comes to OT. Not only is it not as obvious, it's not as obvious what the impact might be if you don't patch it. And a kind of assumption that the other people involved in that production environment would be responsible for the security of that. The IT people expect the OT people to look after the patching and security because that's what their focus is. And the OT people assume the IT guys are looking after security for them.
So it seems like there's plenty of room for improvement here when it comes to OT security, whether it's the regularity of updating devices and software on these devices, integrating across the organization, and just general awareness. Obviously, there's a lot of work that many security leaders could do to probably improve their own OT security. But from your perspective, why would that matter? Why should this be a priority, or should it be a priority for security leaders? And I think also, I'm wondering too, if you have any thoughts on which industries should care about this. I think from my perspective, I typically think of OT security as something that really is going to matter to large scale industrial manufacturing. But I think the more I look at this, the more I realize OT devices are not just in critical infrastructure manufacturing. They're pretty much across many, if not most, industries. So talk to us about, why do you think this matters, and does it matter? Who does it matter to?
Yeah, sure. So I'd say you're right. OT is obviously integral in manufacturing. That's clear because they're machines. Normally, that when you think of OT, when I think of OT, I think of manufacturing. But energy, right? That has a massive OT component because it isn't IT systems that are deciding when to open a particular switch or open a particular control that will manage that energy supply. Transportation, utilities, all of these things, all of these industries rely on machines to do certain things. And so there's always going to be a risk that some of these machines might be targeted for a very specific reason. Yeah, I think it's really important that we actually monitor and control these, even if they're not manufacturing. Yeah, I think it's not fair to say it's just manufacturing. I really do think it's across all industries. Let's go with an example of healthcare, right? If an attack were to take place on healthcare OT, that would include things that aren't IT. So not the computers that are on wheels across different hospital rooms, but everything else that has a plug that is doing something. That's pretty terrifying. It doesn't run Windows, it doesn't run Linux, but it does run some operating system and is being controlled in some way. That could be terrifying, right? If all of those devices were suddenly either not available or controlled by someone else. Farming, agriculture, right? All of that is industrial. All of that is run by machines, and someone decides how these machines work, but they use a programming function to do that, and they tell the machines how to do it using some kind of interface. And if that interface was attacked in some way, then it could completely change how farming works. Over irrigation or ruining the crops in some way, yeah, there's always a machine involved.
Are there any noteworthy attacks that you think of, or watershed moments that you think draw more attention to or focus on OT security?
Yeah, sure. The one that is notable mostly to me, and the one that I always go back to, will be Stuxnet over a decade ago. And that was a huge malware campaign against nuclear facilities in Iran. Really, it was designed to cause physical damage and break stuff, which meant it essentially had a huge impact because it was very successful. And it was a very clever attack, terrifying when you actually look at the detail of it. But that really highlights how a cyber attack could cause physical harm to critical infrastructure, and critical infrastructure is critical because people rely on it and humans rely on it, which is terrifying. Also, Ukrainian power grid attack back in 2015, there were widespread blackouts in Ukraine because of OT, specifically the power systems. Those are the ones that kind of are obvious, but then you've got less obvious ones like the Colonial Pipeline. That was an IT attack, right? So that was IT systems that were attacked and went down. But because of that, they took the decision to turn off the OT, the actual pipeline, because of the risk of some attack taking place there. Now, that decision to have that huge cost to that organization, yeah, so those are the ones that really stick in my mind as being examples that we can draw on right now. There are others that are important.
And so a couple of those examples you mentioned, maybe all of them, are nation state attacks. Are there any threats that you think of? Or earlier you mentioned ransomware. I'm thinking about maybe mid-sized organizations who have constrained security budget and have to pick and choose where they focus. And maybe defending against a massive nation state attack isn't their top focus. But is this still an attack vector or an attack surface that IT and security leaders should be thinking about, not just from the nation state attack perspective, but from opportunistic ransomware groups?
Yeah, exactly. Monetizing an attack is one of the main reasons attacks takes place, apart from the nation state one, which obviously has money pouring into it rather than the other way around. Yeah, ransomware is a big deal, I think. If you were able to target specific OT systems and then encrypt some of the access to that and make it impossible to do whatever that OT system was meant to be doing. So if it was a car plant, for example, and you stop that organization from being able to build cars, then they would be financially incentivized to give you some money to stop doing that. So that could obviously be a way to monetize an OT attack. You could obviously attack the IT, but you might find that the OT is actually less secure and easier to attack if you know what you're looking for. There's obviously supply chain stuff as well, where you could attack many organizations by attacking a particular device that is prevalent around OT environments. There was actually a recent case in Triton, I think it was called, which was actually targeting the actual control instruments that were being used by this organization and many other organizations, and actually just tried to switch off the safety elements of those, which meant effectively it was unsafe to work in those organizations. And really, that's obviously a huge deal as well. And that could cause reputational harm to these organizations if people are killed or harmed in doing their job. So I think there's many different risks that are involved in this. And you have to look at it from a different perspective. Is it what if? And the CVSS, the Common Vulnerability Score, you're not going to have that translated to potential harm if this vulnerability is exploited within a manufacturing environment or within an OT environment. We need to really extrapolate that and really think what could be the risk of this taking place.
All right, Dean, one more question for you. So from your advice for IT and security leaders who maybe recognize this could be a weak point for them, given the challenges of updating, given the challenges of integration, given the challenges of lack of clarity over who in the organization should actually be responsible for this, what's your recommendation, or what are some of the best practices that you would point to?
Yeah, good question. So I think it's important to develop some kind of OT specific security strategy. That's mostly missing in most organizations that have this kind of problem, because we need to recognize that OT is a completely different animal, completely different set of problems that you're facing, and therefore a different set of requirements compared to IT, which is what we normally understand as how security works within an organization. And obviously we need to not just think about the security of it and the user impact of that, because normally the users are factory workers or people who are responsible for making a thing work. We need to focus on the availability and the safety and the reliability of those OT things, which is not normally the case with IT. Normally, if someone's laptop doesn't work for a few hours because you're rebuilding it because it had a virus, that's acceptable to the end user. Normally, they can maybe use the web. It's not really acceptable to take a car plant down for half a day while you rebuild it. So it just has a completely different set of problems and therefore a different set of solutions. The other thing to be aware of is really enhancing visibility. Right now, you might have no visibility of the security threats within an OT environment because it's very difficult to actually get to that visibility. You can't install an agent on an operational technology device. You can't install an agent on a machine because it doesn't run Windows, right? It doesn't run Linux or any kind of operating system that would accept some third-party agent. And really, no one would let you do that. So the people who are responsible for making these things that are being produced by OT or being managed by OT wouldn't want a third-party agent sat on there anyway. So you've got to think about how you can gather the insights and the intelligence about the threats and the vulnerabilities that are in your OT network differently, because you can no longer just ask these devices what their threats and vulnerabilities are. You need to detect them. And one of the ways of detecting those is through OT-specific security solutions, like Defender for IoT, for OT devices, for example, which will allow you to capture traffic and sniff the traffic that's going through the network to these OT devices, and to analyze that traffic to see whether that traffic has any vulnerabilities in it. Not only the vulnerabilities, though, if you allow this system to bed in and get a baseline of what happens normally in your environment, then you can get a sense of when things are different, when things are drifting from what they should be. So, for example, if the machine turns off every night at 10 p.m. and it doesn't turn on again until the next morning at 7 a.m., and at one point it turns off at 6 p.m., for example, that could be an alert that would go into the system. The next thing you need to think of is who's looking at that alert. Is that going to be your third-party SOC, or is it going to be someone in the organization who knows what that means and why that might have turned off at 6 p.m. on this day, for example? So you need to figure out whether that will work for you to receive an alert to the head of manufacturing, or should it go to the SOC because they will be able to raise that. And that's another point, is really making sure your SOC and your security team actually understand OT. It's a completely different set of problems, a completely different set of solutions that we have. So it's really important that the team of defenders who are responsible for responding to an OT alert actually know what that OT alert means, because they obviously can't turn that machine off if there's an alert, or respond to it in a normal way you would with IT challenges and IT security. So you need to make sure that security team fully understand OT and your OT.
I think that's a great response. So first and foremost, have a strategy around your OT security. Make sure you have visibility across the environment. Make sure you understand who's actually watching the environment, and that you have a baseline understanding of what normal looks like, and that you truly understand what's happening in that OT environment. You have a baseline, and you can respond, and who's going to respond when some kind of abnormality happens. Dean, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today. Dean Ellerby, VP of Community and Product Strategy at RoboPack, Microsoft MVP and Technical Fellow at Cybersecurity for AlpenShield. You can check out Dean's phenomenal content on his YouTube channel. Thank you, Dean.